There isn't just one right way to use an equalizer. There is no secret to professional equalization. The equalizer is just one of many tools we have at our disposal to achieve the goals we have in mind. We can use it however we want. From an artistic point of view, there are no rules. However, there are some technical aspects that, if taken into consideration, can bring benefits, such as a faster workflow and greater awareness in your choices. In this video, we'll look at some of the advantages of subtractive equalization. As the name suggests, subtractive equalization is the process of reducing the level of certain frequency bands to remove or attenuate unwanted sounds. On the other hand, additive equalization involves boosting certain frequency bands. In practice, we choose to remove what we don't like rather than boost what we do like. For technical reasons, when working with analog equipment, it makes sense to use subtractive equalization. In digital, there's not a big difference between the two approaches, both are valid. If you prefer one over the other and get good results, that's perfectly fine, there's no reason to look for another way to work. However, since they're not so obvious, let's look at 5 advantages of subtractive equalization to consider when you start working. Ringing is a complex topic, and we have a video planned where we'll talk about it in more detail. For now, to keep it simple, we can say that every time you equalize a signal, you introduce an artifact called, precisely, ringing. Ringing appears as additional oscillations that are easily visible at the end of the signal, but are always present throughout its entire duration. Ringing cannot be eliminated and is necessary for equalization. In fact, ringing is equalization. What we're looking at now is an impulse, meaning a signal made up of just one sample. We run it through an equalizer, and this is what we get at the output. This waveform is the impulse response, and it's what the EQ adds to the input signal to equalize it. So what we're actually seeing is the ringing. Plugin Doctor allows us to analyze the impulse response, so we can see how the amplitude and duration of these oscillations depend on the EQ settings. The more extreme the adjustments, the more pronounced these oscillations become. Generally, ringing isn't very bothersome to the ear, but in more extreme cases, with very aggressive EQ settings, it can have a negative effect, for example on transients. One of the advantages of subtractive equalization is that negative gain values introduce less ringing compared to positive ones, all other settings being equal. Masking is a phenomenon where a frequency with a certain amplitude can make it harder to perceive nearby frequencies with lower amplitude. In other words, a loud sound can hide or mask a weaker sound that is close to it. Masking is a key concept in the field of psychoacoustics and helps us understand how our brain interprets and processes sounds. It also has a major impact on the choices made during mixing, and knowing about it helps you make more informed decisions. In general, when you use subtractive equalization, you reduce masking and create greater definition in a mix. This is because when you use an EQ to cut out all those sounds that aren't considered important, you're not just lowering those bands, but due to the reduced masking, you're actually allowing the neighboring frequencies to stand out more. This concept is at the heart of the success of many vintage equalizers, such as the Pultec. In fact, if we look at the frequency response of this EQ, we can see how it's possible to introduce a slight cut just before or just after a boost. This helps give the impression of greater presence in that band, creating more separation between what's above and what's below the cut. Instead of boosting a frequency band, we can achieve a similar result by attenuating the bands that mask the signal. The same applies within a mix. By cutting certain frequencies on one track, we can hear them more clearly on other tracks without having to raise their levels. Subtractive equalization can also offer several advantages when it comes to managing headroom. In fact, by reducing certain frequencies, it allows you to lower the overall signal level, reducing the risk of distortion. Additionally, it's especially useful to remove unwanted frequencies before the signal goes into other processors, such as compressors. This way, the eliminated frequencies won't cause the processor to kick in prematurely, improving the final result. If you also want to emphasize certain frequencies, you can do so with a second equalizer placed after this processor. Many people know the various online distribution platforms have specific requirements for loudness levels. Loudness is a way to quantify the perception of sound intensity, and its measurement takes into account the ear's sensitivity to different frequencies. With subtractive equalization, the volume is reduced in certain frequency bands, resulting in a decrease in loudness. This allows you to raise the overall level of the track, so that once you return to the same loudness value, it gives the impression of a higher total volume. So, with the same loudness, the track that has undergone subtractive equalization will sound louder. This is one of the ways to achieve mixes and masters that sound louder at the same loudness level. In our opinion, the most important reason to use subtractive equalization is that it helps develop your ear. Especially for beginners, it's easier to boost what you like rather than cut what you don't need. It's more instinctive and more satisfying. Furthermore, psychoacoustics teaches us that our ears prefer increases in volume over decreases. What sounds louder seems better to us. That's why, when you're just starting out, it's natural to use additive equalization. It makes everything seem like it sounds better. If you use subtractive equalization and notice an improvement in the sound, you can be sure that it has actually improved and that it's not just an illusion caused by higher volume. Working this way is more difficult and requires more experience. But it's also the best way to train your ear and develop awareness.